What can you learn in the next 21 minutes? We're about to find out. Hi, I'm Kiki L'Italienne, and I am here to welcome you to the 21 in 21 Talks, where invited speakers share their 21-minute talks about all kinds of things. I mean, it's everything ranging from house building to woodworking to you name it. The series consists of 21 talks, 21 minutes long, in, you guessed it, 2021. So all of these talks can be watched live or as replays over on the Association Chat YouTube channel. I hope that you'll visit that. And if you think that supporting Association Chat is the sort of thing that's going to make your dog or your cats or your kids love you more, it probably will. So why don't you go ahead, consider becoming a Patreon patron by visiting patreon.com/Association Chat. All one word, simple. All right. For this special 21 in 21 talk, we're featuring Adrian Seeger. Now, Adrian is a good friend of mine, but he's also an internationally known designer, facilitator, and passionate advocate of participant-driven and participation-rich events. He's also the author of 3 influential books on meeting design. He runs the world's most popular website on meeting design, conferencesthatwork.com. You have to visit it. Look for the website at the bottom of the screen coming up. And in 2019 and 2020, he was named one of the 100 most influential people in the events industry in a global poll of over 4,000 event professionals. And today, Adrian is going to share with us how to trust your gut and when you shouldn't. All right, take it away, Adrian.
Thank you, Kiki. And again, I'm not going to talk about anything about meeting design or anything like that at all, because here's what happened. About 7 weeks ago, Kiki posted this topic on the Association Chat Facebook group. If you could speak on any subject for 20 minutes, it was at the time, what would it be? And the moment that I saw that, this topic, how to trust your gut, came into my head. I have no idea where it came from. I've never spoken on this topic before. I may well never speak on it again. I have no idea. But I trusted my gut and I wrote that down. I said, Kiki, I'll talk on this. I've got a couple of months to think about what I want to do, and here we are. So I'm going to do 3 things in this talk. I'm going to, 1, tell my story about how I've come to trust my gut and its big effect on my life. 2, I'm going to share some ideas about how you might get to trust your gut, some things that might be helpful for you. And 3, I'm going to talk about when you maybe shouldn't trust your gut. I'm going to turn 70 in September, and it's taken me over half a century to realize that I could fundamentally trust my gut. And what do I mean by that? What do I mean by trust my gut? Well, another word that people often use is intuition. I trust my intuition. Ideas pop into my head at random times, and sometimes they suggest a course of action that feels right to me, and I do it. That's what trusting my gut means to me. And I have many examples of this, but probably the most striking occurred when I was 24. As some of you may know, I was born and grew up in England, and which is where I met Celia, my wife of 44 years now. And she was an American living in London. We met in London and started living together. And at that time, I had a really sort of well-defined career track. I was finishing my PhD in high-energy particle physics. I was working on the big accelerator at CERN. And, that would turn into a postdoc. Once I'd got that, no problem. And in those days, you had a pretty good chance of getting tenure. 7 years later, they give you tenure, and I would be an academic for the rest of my life. So, that's where I was. And Celia said to me one day, I guess we'd been together a year or so, and she said, it's time for you to meet my family in America, in New York City. And this was only the second time I'd ever been to America. I had been when I was a college student, and I spent a summer in California. I had an amazing time, but I came back with absolutely no interest in living in the United States at all. And so we flew to New York. I met her family, and Celia said, I've got these friends up in Vermont, and let's drive up for a weekend and visit them. I'd like to introduce you to them. So we drove up, and for the next 24 hours, I was uncharacteristically quiet. And Celia, said to her friends, he's not usually like this. And the next morning I woke up and I turned to her and I said, I think I'd like to live here. And this was crazy because you can't do high energy physics in Vermont. I spent 25 years of my life, this sort of schoolboy nerd, studying physics. I wanted to understand the world, physics, fantastic way to, do that. And suddenly I was just throwing all this away from this feeling that I had that I wanted to live in Vermont. Crazy stuff. So luckily Celia had spent summers in Vermont. She was up for it. So it took a couple of years because we had to figure out what on earth we would do to make a living in Vermont. And in '78, we moved to Vermont, and I started working in a solar energy manufacturing company. And this was the time of the first energy crisis when gasoline got to $1 a gallon. Everybody freaked out, and we were building solar hot water systems and selling them. And I learned a lot from doing that. I'd never been in business before, but it was a great thing to do. And 5 years after that, my partner called me in on a Friday and said, Adrian, I don't want to work with you anymore. And suddenly I was out of a job. And luckily I landed a job immediately teaching computer science at the college level. And shortly after that, started doing what has been very good to me, IT consulting. Information technology consulting as an independent consultant on these weird things that were coming in called personal computers. I did that for about 20 years. Now, the whole time I'd been doing this, so that's 4 careers right there, none of which I, apart from the first one, I had was aware was going to happen. The whole time I'd been doing these things, I had been organizing conferences. I just felt drawn to organizing conferences on whatever I was currently professionally involved with. So the particle physics, I organized some of the earliest solar energy conferences in the United States, and then IT and education. And I'd also got busy in nonprofit work. I was on boards and so on, and I was designing and facilitating nonprofit conferences. And during all this time, I developed a way of doing meetings as Kiki mentioned that was really kind of different from the academic conferences I'd been forced to attend when I was a grad student. And one day but this was all, in part-time. And one day in around 2005, I was looking through a filing cabinet of all those paper evaluations that we used to have to fill out when we went to conferences. And I'm looking at these evaluations, and I'm thinking, people really like this way I have of doing conferences. I want to write a book about it. And again, I was a very successful, well-paid IT consultant at the time, and I'm going to write a book. I'd never written a book before in my life. My thesis doesn't count. That's just a formal document. I didn't even know if I could write a book. It took me, but my gut said, you should get this book. I had no idea whether anyone would even read it, but I just felt I needed to do it. And it was good that it was coming from my gut rather than some sort of rational determination that there's a market for this book. Because for the first 2 years of writing this book, trying to write this book, I wrote almost nothing. I was almost convinced that I couldn't write a thing. And then years 3 and 4, I sort of broke through and the book got written. And the book was published in 2009. And suddenly in my 5th career, I'm professionally involved in the meeting industry, which I have been ever since. And I love doing this work. It's taken me 60 years to figure out that I love to facilitate connection with between people in ways that are useful for them, in ways that meet their wants and needs. And that's what I do these days. And it's a far cry from doing research in particle physics and with totally different kinds of people. And I'm very, very happy that I've made this journey. So that's the story of how trusting my gut has changed my life. But at this point, I want to say a little bit about what I've learned about how to trust your gut. And I think there are really 4 things that are useful to talk about. And the first one is knowing yourself fairly well. I know that that's a sort of nebulous topic. First of all, no one can know themselves. We all perfectly. We all have gaps. There are things that we are afraid of about ourselves, that we kind of avoid. And then, of course, and there are things about ourselves that we're totally unaware of about ourselves that maybe other people can see, but we can't. And so knowing yourself in some way fairly well, and how that gets defined is, you could probably spend your life talking about that, is important. But it's not enough, because number two, not only do you have to know yourself, but you also have to work on being yourself. In other words, you may get these ideas and thoughts and so on, but if you don't actually act on them, in other words, if your actions aren't congruent with what your gut is telling you, being who you are, you're not going to do very well in trusting your gut. You're not trusting your gut because you're not acting on it. And doing all this, of course, this is, again, a work in progress. It's not like it's lifetime work, being yourself and acting on yourself. But you can work on it and improve it in time. And this is something that actually was really difficult for me, because I'd been trained as an academic, and I'd been trained in trusting your gut requires accepting that our thinking doesn't determine what we do. And I have been boasted by, there's now been a lot of academic research over the last 30 years or so, which shows that actually we are run by our emotions and not by our reasoning. And you can read Jonathan Haidt's book, The Happiness Hypothesis, about that, or where he has this beautiful metaphor of your reasoning as the rider, on your emotions as the elephant. The rider has a certain amount of control over where the elephant goes, but fundamentally, in the end, it's the elephant that decides where it's going to go. And there's also Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, which basically says the same kind of thing. We have these two different ways of thinking, if you like, cognition. And it turns out that our feelings actually run our lives. Certainly they have been running mine, and again, I don't regret that at all. So the third thing that you need to be able to do, of course, and this is part of action, is to take risks. You have to do things. Your gut tells you to do things, like telling me to talk about something I've never talked about in my life 7 weeks ago, and do it. And this is a risky thing, and maybe it'll work. You be the judge. Maybe there'll be things I'll learn from it, which is great. And then what's really important when you take those risks is notice what happens. You've got to notice what happens so that you can learn from that. Was it good that I trusted my gut here? Maybe it wasn't. Okay, and I'll talk a little bit in a minute about what you do when trusting your gut that turns out not to be a good thing to do. One of the examples, a sort of trivial example in my life that I've really worked on, and I mean, not consciously, but it's given me a lot of pleasure over the years, is striking up conversations with strangers. No, I will try to be appropriate about that. I'm not going to, bore you to death. I'm going to monopolize you if I am sitting next to you in an airplane. But I've had the most amazing conversations over the years with strangers in, the seat next to me, sometimes more than one stranger, and they've been very intimate conversations. I've shared intimate things about myself. They've shared intimate things about them. And then the plane lands and we leave and we never see each other again. And those have been wonderful experiences, to be in someone's world for a little while. And that's something that I would never have done, 30, 40 years ago, I think. I just sit there and read my book. So taking risks is the third part. And then the fourth part is practice. And, the typical example of this, which I think a lot of people struggle with, is me in public speaking. 25 years ago, when I started speaking public, I was terrified at doing it, absolutely terrified. And practice has allowed me, just doing it and noticing that I'm still alive at the end of it and so on, and improving. I'm not a public speaker. I don't think of myself as a public speaker, but I facilitate and convene things, hopefully successfully or well enough. And these days, I'm perfectly comfortable talking to hundreds of thousands of people. I just don't care anymore. There's a little bit of nervous excitement, but practice has made all the difference. has actually been interesting with me when I had to switch to talking to video cameras like I'm doing right now. And I remember when that started happening a few years ago, it was really uncomfortable for me. It's such an unhuman thing to do. But again, practice gets you used to it. So let me now talk about when you shouldn't trust your gut. And again, this is sort of the converse of what I've been saying. We are all imperfect creatures, all imperfect beings. We have gaps in our self-knowledge. And for example, we all know people who have a really hard time for some reason, or for many different reasons, making or keeping intimate relationships. Most people want to have an intimate relationship with a partner or partners and intimate friends, close friends, and so on. And there are some people that just have a really hard time doing it. Well, that's an indication that their gut response to being with someone isn't working for them in some way. And probably the most important thing you can do when you're in that situation, which all of us are in various times and various situations, is to notice when your gut is not giving you, noticing the times when trusting your gut didn't work out well for you. You notice that, and then there are really two things that you can do. The first thing is you can where are we? Oh, I want to give you an example. A good example for me is I have learned a long time ago that trusting my gut in terms of making prognostications about the future in American politics, I am terrible at that. I'm probably all kinds of politics as well. And I remember when that happened in 1980, when my wife and I were watching the famous Carter-Reagan presidential debate on TV. And we watched it, and at the end of it, I turned to Celia and said about Reagan, I said, well, there's no way that anyone would vote for him. Was I wrong about that? And, you know, I now know that my gut will tell me all kinds of things, and my gut will tell me what I'd like to have happen, but I have no ability to actually predict the future there, and that's okay. So giving up things that your gut is essentially telling you that are unreliable is not necessarily a bad thing to do. But the other thing you can do, of course, is work on training the accuracy of your gut response. And there are really two things that you need to do that. The first is almost invariably, you're going to need to get help. If your gut is consistently giving you a bad advice, so to speak, you need some outside advice on how to maybe retrain your gut or to discover aspects of your gut you're not aware of, your intuition you're not aware of, that's leading you astray. And that might involve, you know, if it's public speaking, going to Toastmasters or getting a voice coach or a speaking coach or whatever, or going to see a therapist. You know, if there's stuff that you keep screwing up in your life because you're attracted to the wrong person or whatever it is. So getting help is kind of crucial if you want to change the fallibility of your gut response to things. And again, the second part is practice. Practicing will help you get better at aligning your gut response into what actually is something that's actually useful for you and that brings value to your life. And if you don't do those things, I want to say a minute about this, you will get stuck. And we all know people who are stuck in their lives, and sometimes it's stuck in minor ways and we can deal with it, and sometimes it's kind of goes the whole spectrum to kind of tragic. I mean, I know people who were put in a career track of my age and have stayed in it their whole lives, and they're not really very happy in that career track. But and I bet you that their gut has told them throughout their life they're not very happy about it, but they have not done anything about it. So being stuck is sort of tragic sometimes, and sometimes there's we're all stuck in various ways. Hopefully, most of them are minor, but being stuck in major ways is something that if you can avoid it, that would be great from my perspective. Trusting your gut and acting on your gut realistically can help you get out of your stuckness. So obviously, in conclusion, I'm making a pitch for trusting your gut, especially if you haven't had bad experiences. When you do, then try doing it a little bit more. There is no way that I would have predicted how my life has turned out, but I'm very, very happy that it has turned out the way that it has. I don't regret the emotional, life-changing choices that I've made a bit at all. And if this talk has made you a little more likely the next time your gut tells you something to say, yeah, maybe I'll try that, I'll do that, than you were before, then I'm happy for you. Thanks for listening.
Wow. Oh, wow. I just have to say, I am so grateful to Adrian for teaching us about this topic about trusting your gut and when not to. For years, I have to share a little personal anecdote. For years, I used to say I couldn't trust my gut because it had led me down the path. And I realized I had to reframe the story and really investigate, like he said, investigate those times when my gut had led me astray. Because when I started looking at it deeper, I discovered that I was actually pretty great at being intuitive and tuned in. And the times when I said that I couldn't trust my gut was usually when I was ignoring something that I didn't want to see. Right. So knowing yourself, all of these rules, I wrote down the 4 rules. If you want to go back and listen to this again, they were: know yourself, be yourself, take risks, and practice. And so thank you so much, Adrian, for sharing your 21 in 21 talk with us today. For everyone watching, you've now become 21 minutes smarter about how to trust your gut and when you shouldn't. And what are you going to do with that knowledge? What happens next? That's up to you. So in the world of association chat, you know that beyond these 21 minutes, we ask you to keep asking questions every day. Because as Joseph Campbell once said, the cave you fear to enter, I had to think about it. The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. Have a great rest of the week, everyone.